Okay, so afferent's going where? Away from or into the central nervous system? It's going into, so it's going at the central nervous system. Efferent's coming out. When we subdivide the efferent is split into the autonomic and the somatic. The big difference between these two is somatic is voluntary. So what kind of muscle does it primarily control? Skeletal. And then autonomic is automatic, so it's involuntary. What two types of muscles does it primarily control? Smooth and cardiac. All right, when we look at these neurons, the pathways that go out to control these muscles or the glands that we're going to control, they have two special names. So preganglionic and postganglionic. Here's your central nervous system, your spinal cord. The first neuron that comes out, here you see the cell body. Cell body's in the central nervous system, but the axon's outside of it. So what type of neuron is this again, in general? Afferent or efferent? Efferent. Remember, afferents have the cell body out in the periphery. So here you have the efferent neuron. The first one coming out for the autonomic system we call the preganglionic fiber. They call it preganglion because, well, number one, how many directions will this signal go? Only one. So it's going in this direction. When it gets to this area here of gray matter that sits out in the periphery, they call that a ganglion. What's gray matter made out of? Cell bodies, terminals, exactly, the dendrites. So here you have the gray matter. It's a lot of proteins, cell bodies, neurotransmitters, nuclei. It's gray in color. This is the ganglion when it's outside of the central nervous system. So the fiber that's going into it's the preganglionic. Its synapses makes a connection with the postganglionic because this is going to be the one going out of the ganglion. So you have a receptor here, you have a neurotransmitter, and we're going to talk about the different types of neurotransmitters coming up here. So this signal sends all the way over to whatever organ it's trying to control, and it has another gap, another synapse area. So they call these little bulbs here varicosities, just a fancy name for the autonomic terminals. And they release neurotransmitters to go across the synapse and bind to a receptor and turn on this effector organ. Right, so there are two special sections, or two special neurons in an autonomic nervous system. You have the preganglionic and the post. And they describe it around this ganglion, this cell body structure. Right. So here's the trick. Right away, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic are the two main branches or divisions of the autonomic nervous system. What do you know in general? If one does one thing, what's the other one do? The opposite. In general. Not always, but in general you can count on that. It's the same way with these neurons. If one of them has a long preganglionic, the other one will probably have a short one. If the one has a long postganglionic, the other one will have a short one. So they're opposites. This first one, when you're looking at the sympathetic comes from two parts of your spinal column, or parts of your central nervous system. Either it comes from the lumbar or the thoracic, so the midsections. So they call it the thoracolumbar nervous system also because it comes from those two areas. And then the preganglionic fibers of this one are short. If you remember from anatomy, they had that paravertebral chain ganglia. Paravertebral means just next to the vertebra. Chain ganglion because they're all connected in a long chain that go right next to your spinal column. So the neuron that comes from the spinal column out to there is not very long. It just comes outside. It's a short preganglionic fiber. Those ganglions, the chain ganglions, are these bodies right here. So the fibers that come out of that are the postganglionic fibers, and they go all the way down to an organ. So when you describe the preganglionic or the sympathetic, it's short. When you describe the postganglionic, it's very long. Parasympathetic is exactly the opposite. So if I just told you sympathetic has a short preganglionic fiber, what do you know about the parasympathetic? It has a long one. So the parasympathetic comes from the cranium and the sacrum. Its main branches come from right here at the base of the skull or from the sacrum. If you ever go to a massage therapist, they practice something called craniosacral therapy. What are they trying to stimulate? Cranial and sacral. Parasympathetic. Why are they trying to stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system? What do we also call that? The rest and digest, the relaxation pathway. Why would they not want to stimulate your sympathetic or your thoracolumbar? Fight or flight. Yeah, if you're laying naked on a table and then suddenly go, ah, and they jump up and they run across the room, it's not a good experience. To pay for college, I was actually a massage therapist. I got my certificate and all that stuff. So I always think of that, it would be hilarious. A naked person jumps up off the table and runs across the room. But parasympathetic, they're trying to relax you, trying to calm you down, increase your digestive function and relaxation functions. So the parasympathetic is the craniosacral, the rest and digest. You know the preganglionic fibers are what? Short or long? for the parasympathetic. They're long. And so this one's going to be short. Yep, the postganglion is short. And you know that, well, two ways to remember it. The pre and the post are always the opposite of each other. The sympathetic and the parasympathetic are almost always the opposite of each other, right? So if the parasympathetic has a very long preganglionic, what's its postganglionic have to be? Short. If the parasympathetic has a long preganglionic, what does the sympathetic have to have? A short preganglionic. So you can think of it in that way with patterns. So if we look at it, this is what it looks like. The pinks are the what? If it's coming from the base of the skull and the sacrum, the pink would be para. Yep, and then here you have the thoracic region and the lumbar region. It's got to be the sympathetic. Yep. Next thing is you're looking at those preganglionic fibers. Look, this is the parasympathetic. Look how long that preganglion is, all the way out to the ganglion, and then the post is just dink, right next door to the organ. Same with down here. Really long out to the ganglion, short to the organ. So if this organ's the heart, you've got this long fiber, this preganglionic fiber going all the way out to the heart, and then right outside of the heart you have a ganglion, and then the post is just right into the heart. I'll show you pictures of that too. And then if this is a long preganglion, what do you know about the sympathetic? Short preganglion. Yeah, just the opposite. And then the postganglion is extremely long, going all the way out. All right, next is the neurotransmitters. Here's the easy way to remember it. Every synapse in the autonomic nervous system is acetylcholine driven. All of them have acetylcholine except the postganglionic sympathetic. The postganglionic sympathetic has norepinephrine as its neurotransmitter. Sympathetic, what do you think of? Your sympathetic nervous system firing, you get a what kind of rush? Adrenaline. Guess what the other name for epinephrine is? Adrenaline. So when you see epinephrine, norepinephrine in the name, you want to think adrenaline. Sympathetic nervous system, at the postganglionic fiber, at the very end, way out here, it releases norepinephrine. So if this is the heart, the preganglionic releases acetylcholine to stimulate the postganglionic. The postganglionic releases adrenaline directly onto the heart. What's it going to do to your heart rate? Increase it. Yeah, think about it. When you have an adrenaline rush, what happens to your heart rate? It goes up. If that's released onto the pupil of the eye, what's it going to do to your pupils? Constrict or dilate? Dilate, right? Fight or flight, adrenaline. You get a shot of adrenaline, your pupils dilate. What happens to your breathing rate? Increases. What happens if this is a sweat gland? Does it turn it off or turn it on? It turns it on. What if this is your digestive tract? What's it do? Turns it off. Right, good catch. So it turns it off. So all of these connections, everywhere is acetylcholine except at the very end of the postganglionic. So acetylcholine here, acetylcholine here, acetylcholine there, acetylcholine here, except at the post fiber, right here. It's the only exception. So post fiber of the sympathetic releases adrenaline, noradrenaline, instead of releasing acetylcholine. Okay, so the next, ANS is there to regulate unconscious activities or involuntary activities. And we refer to as visceral organs as the gut organs. So if your sympathetic goes out to your heart, you already said, what's it do? Sympathetic does increases heart rate. And you can see the pathway coming up here from the thoracic region down into the heart, increases your heart rate. We refer to this as being dually innervated because this parasympathetic goes straight over to the heart too. What's the parasympathetic going to do to your heart rate? It relaxes it. Neither of them ever completely shut off. They're always competing. They're trying to both win. It's like a teeter-totter, two kids on a teeter-totter. One's pushing down on one side, so what's the other kid going to do? Try and push harder. Yep. And then when one overpowers, the other one's going to try and come back. What's that process of keeping balance called? Homeostasis. Equilibrium is a good word too, but homeostasis is trying to keep it balanced or level. If one overpowers, it's kind of like, think of it this way. You get an adrenaline rush. You're running for your life, and you've got this big wad of adrenaline. Adrenaline's winning, but as soon as you're done, what's going to happen to you? Because the parasympathetic's trying to keep up, suddenly the parasympathetic turns up really high to try and cancel out the sympathetic. What actually happens? You crash. You're like, and you just crash. It's homeostasis. If one side pushes down really hard, really fast, the other side's going to have to push down really hard, even harder to try and do what? Bring it back. Unfortunately, what you usually find is that you over-push on one side and it brings it over extreme. Insulin's a good example too. Give a kid, just do this for a fun experiment, give a kid can of soda. Nice, good old-fashioned high-sugar soda, right? Give them a shiny quarter if they can drink it in less than a minute. How are they going to act 5 minutes from now? Crazy, because the sugar piled up in their blood. It's really high, so what chemical has to come out to try and bring that sugar level down? Insulin. Insulin comes out, and as it's bringing the sugar level back down, insulin's actually really so fast that how do they feel another 5 minutes later? Crashed, because that insulin came out so abundantly that it actually pulled too much in. So that's the cool thing about physiology is if something turns a system on, what do you also know has to exist? Something to turn it off. There's always two perspectives in physiology. It's like accelerators and brakes. Can you slow your car down without a brake? Huh? Well, hopefully you're not hitting another car, but what can you do to slow your car down? Let off the accelerator. I know you know this because you come up over a hill speeding a little bit and there's a cop on the other side. What do? You let off the accelerator. You're like, should I hit the brake? Should I hit the brake? And you start slowing down. But I'm no fool. I do that all the time. All right, so dual innervation means that both systems control it. And they're always in competition. Neither of them completely shuts off. And just to illustrate, the only system we're going to talk about all the way till the last week of class that controls blood vessel size is going to be the sympathetic. No parasympathetic control until the last week of class. So sympathetic causes your blood vessels to constrict, raising your blood pressure. What would happen if you shut the sympathetic off? All of your blood vessels would do what? They'd all dilate completely. What would happen to all the blood in your body if all your blood vessels just dilated? Exactly. All the blood raced to your toes and you'd pass out. So neither of them completely shut off. And sometimes I'll say it tries to turn this off, but it's never actually shutting off. So I don't want you to think that I mean, your sympathetic just turns completely off. It doesn't do that. When it does that when you're dead. That's the only time. All right, so sympathetic, most of these are common sense. If you're thinking running for your life, think of what your body's doing when you're running for your life, and that's the sympathetic. If you're running for your life, do you stop to take a leak? Nope. So does the sympathetic turn up urination or down? Turns it down. How about do you stop to defecate? I was thinking of a creative word without actually getting vulgar. But no, you don't stop to defecate. Those people that are scared and they wet their pants or are scared and they poop themselves, those people, at the point where they were scared, they were probably already looking for a bathroom because their bladder was full, their rectum was full, whatever, and they were probably needing to go to the bathroom and somebody just happened to scare them and they squeezed their abdominal muscles and that was it.
What about cross-country runners that pee themselves?
Because they don't want to lose the race. They should have gone before they got going.
I thought most of the women, it was because they actually can't
that could
control it.
Well, there's also incontinence, like overflow incontinence, where you fill up the bladder too much and then you can't help it. Like women, the urethra is only about 1.5 inches long in women. So that's why they get a lot of overflow. It's like when you laugh too hard, little oopsie happens. Or pregnant women when they cough and there it went. It's overflow incontinence because, it's a short urethra. So in general, the sympathetic will turn down urination and defecation unless if you have to pee so bad and you're in pain and somebody scares you, you're going to wet yourself. It's done. Yeah. So everybody should have a little meter on their head that says bladder half, 3/4, full. And then when they have the full, you scare the hell out of them, and that'd be a good laugh.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So make sure you go to the bathroom before a scary movie.
Or before your class.
Or before my class because I scare the hell out of you. Right? That scaring is actually helping you remember.
No, it doesn't.
It does. It actually does. Studies show. Okay, so when you're running for your life, think of what happens to your pupils. They dilate. We already went through most of these. The heart rate increases. The breathing increases. Digestion goes down. This is interesting. The liver will start converting glycogen, the storage form of sugar, into glucose. Why would it do that? Because it's dumping. This is storage. This is like having a can of food that does you no good until you do what with the can? Open it and use it, right? So right now the sugar's stored in the liver, and then when you need it, it opens it and dumps it into your system as glucose so you can burn the sugar. The sugar goes up to the brain, and the brain starts burning it to think quickly and on your feet. Right? So if you know these happen with the sympathetic, what could you probably predict with every one of these in the parasympathetic? The opposite, yeah. So pupils constrict, sweating is decreased with the parasympathetic, heart rate decreases, the bronchioles, what are bronchioles? Yep, the airways in the lungs. They will actually constrict. They squeeze down. Motility does what? Or motility for digestion does what with parasympathetic? increases. So what's the liver going to do? Release sugar into the blood? Nope, it's going to pull sugar out of the blood and store it. You know what the name of the chemical that does that to the liver is? You have too much sugar in your blood, insulin comes out and tells your liver start storing it. Yep. So can you die from an insulin overdose?
Yes.
Yeah. Because what happens is all the sugar gets pulled out of your blood and stuck in your liver where it's doing you no good, and then your brain dies. Okay. So parasympathetic, I already said this. Dual innervation means typically it's exactly the opposite. Typically, there are some exceptions to the rule. So here are the exceptions. I love it because I'm a lazy thinker. You're a lazy thinker too. We've already learned that. So I try and think of the things that are almost all the time, and then I memorize the exceptions. And these are the exceptions. So blood vessels only innervated by the sympathetic. Until the last week of class, we'll talk about how the reproductive system actually uses the parasympathetic. But otherwise, all through the next, 8 weeks or something like that, I'm going to keep saying sympathetic controls blood vessels. So if I ask you, if you want to constrict blood vessels, what system do you use? The parasympathetic or the sympathetic? Sympathetic. If you want to dilate, what system do you control? Still sympathetic. If I want to constrict a blood vessel, the sympathetic gets turned on and that blood vessel squeezes, doing what to my blood pressure? Increasing it. If I want to relax my blood pressure, what do I do to the sympathetic nervous system? Turn it down. And as I turn it down, that blood vessel relaxes. So it's, like I said, with the accelerator. The sympathetic's like that accelerator. If you want to speed up your blood pressure, you hit the accelerator. But if you want to slow it down and back off of it, what do you do to the accelerator? Just let off of it. Yeah. There's no brake. There's no parasympathetic that can actually massively vasodilate your blood vessels. Sympathetic's the only thing with control over that right now. And then sweat glands are controlled by the sympathetic, so most sweat glands. And then salivary glands are interesting because typically sympathetic and parasympathetic oppose each other. Salivary glands, they both do the same thing with a twist. You ever been in front of people public speaking? Nervous? How's your mouth feel? Feels dry. You're actually salivating a lot though. You're making a lot of mucus or saliva, but it's thick and sticky, so your mouth feels... Yeah, and you want water to dilute that. So you're actually drooling, but it's a thick, sticky mucus with the sympathetic. Parasympathetic, why would you make watery mucus for parasympathetic? Donuts. Right? To digest the food, to break it down. So they both make you really saliva, it's just a different type of saliva. And then the adrenal medulla, this is kind of a special exception to the rule. The adrenal gland, so here you have the sympathetic sending a post-ganglionic fiber out. The adrenal gland, or the adrenal medulla, they think used to be the post-ganglionic fiber. Sorry, did I say post? Pre-ganglionic fiber is coming out here. The adrenal medulla used to be a post-ganglionic fiber, but something happened where that fiber started getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it turned into its own gland. And we think that because the chemical that the adrenal medulla releases is primarily norepinephrine and epinephrine, the adrenalins. Where the only other real place you see that, well, most of the places you see that is in a postganglionic neuron. So we think it's modified postganglionic neuron here. So it's just kind of like that weird exception to the rule. So here's the pathway. What would you call this coming out of the spinal cord going down to the ganglion? What kind of fiber? Preganglionic. So if this is a sympathetic preganglion, what neurotransmitter is being released here? Try not to look at the key. Acetylcholine. Yep, it's acetylcholine that's being released at every presynaptic fiber. So every one of those preganglionic synapses releases acetylcholine, whether it's sympathetic or parasympathetic. Where's the exception? The postganglionic sympathetic, yeah. So the postganglionic sympathetic here is releasing norepinephrine or epinephrine. So you can see it being dumped here. When you look at the adrenal medulla, it's stimulated by acetylcholine, but it is the postganglionic, so it dumps norepinephrine and epinephrine directly into the blood. Acetylcholine will tell the adrenal medulla it's time to turn on, and the adrenal medulla just dumps this epinephrine in your blood. So where does it go? Where's blood go in your body? Everywhere. It goes everywhere. Tip of your toes to the top of your head. Why doesn't adrenaline work so much on like the muscles at the tip of your toe? They're probably missing... What are these things? Receptors. They're missing receptors. So remember, these neurotransmitters, they need a receptor. When it's dumped into the blood, what's it called now? It's not a neurotransmitter anymore. It's a hormone. What do hormones need to work? Receptors also. Okay. The types of receptors are special. I know this is a very full slide, but this is the details you need. So when you look at a cholinergic receptor, guess what it's receptive to? Cholinergic. Acetylcholine. So cholinergic receptors are sensitive to acetylcholine. It's like the key for the receptor lock. They fit in together. There are two types, though. There's one that's called a nicotinic, and there's one that's called muscarinic. When they named these, they didn't really understand acetylcholine in the lab. They took these receptors, put them in a petri dish, and then they dumped different chemicals that they had around the lab on it until something opened it up. Guess what opened the nicotinic receptor first? Nicotine, so they call it a nicotinic receptor. So acetylcholine works on that receptor, but so does nicotine. Muscarinic, it's an extract from mushrooms called muscarin. So this muscarin opened it up, but so did acetylcholine. So acetylcholine works on both of them. Where you find the nicotinic, you find on the postganglionic cell bodies. So here's your postganglion, there's the cell body. So nicotinic's found there. Muscarinic you find on the parasympathetic postganglionic bodies. And then adrenaline, I love this one. This is the best example, and you'll take this to pharmacology with you. So adrenaline receptors, we call them adrenergic receptors, and there are only 4 that we're going to talk about here. There are actually more than 4, but there are 4 basic ones. They call them the alphas and the betas. So, sounds like a Revenge of the Nerd kind of thing. The alphas and then the betas, and then they're followed by some little number afterwards. So either number 1 or number 2 are the ones you're going to focus on. So alpha and beta, the 1s and the 2s give something away. If it's a 1, it excites. If it's a 2, it inhibits. So if you see a 1 after it, it's an excitatory neuron or an excitatory structure. If it has a 2 after, it's an inhibitory. So epinephrine and norepinephrine, when they bind to an alpha 1, what are they going to do to that cell that has that receptor? Excite it. If another cell is stimulated by norepinephrine or adrenaline, but it has an alpha 2 on it, what's it going to be doing? Inhibiting it, shuts it off. So what would you predict? Would you predict the GI tract has 1s or 2s on it? 2s. Why? Because adrenaline inhibits the GI tract. So you can expect the GI tract to have 2 receptors, number 2s. What would you expect the heart to have on it? A 1, because adrenaline does what to the heart? Inhibits or excites it? Excites it. So this is the first piece of information you can take beyond this class. So if it has a 1 on it, it's excitatory. If it has a 2, it's inhibitory. Second, all 4 of these receptors are shaped kind of like gloves, is the way I think of it. So they're like a glove. Adrenaline and noradrenaline are shaped like the hands. Noradrenaline, or norepinephrine, is a 5-fingered hand. Epinephrine was norepinephrine, but all that happened, clink, you cleave the thumb off of it. So now you've got norepinephrine like this and epinephrine. What's interesting is that if you make a glove that fits a 5-fingered hand, will norepinephrine fit in it? Yep, because it has 5 fingers, right? Will epinephrine fit in it? Yes. It'll fit right into it, right? It just has that empty thumb slot. If you make a glove that's especially for a 4-fingered person, will this hand fit comfortably in it? No. Receptors are exactly the same. If there's a receptor for norepinephrine, will this little epinephrine fit in it? Yes. So it's written out here for you to look at, read, and think about. But in general, you want to remember that epinephrine fits in all 4 locks because all 4 look like a 5-fingered, well, at least like this. The beta 2 is the only exception. Beta 2 is a 4-fingered glove. Will epinephrine fit in it? Epinephrine's small. You can think of it this way too. Norepi is a big word compared to epi, which is small. So which one's bigger? Norepi. Epi's small. Epi's a 4-fingered hand, right? So will it fit in a 4-fingered glove? Epinephrine fits perfectly into a beta 2 receptor. It'll fit into all the receptors, but will norepinephrine fit into that beta 2 receptor? It's 5-finger into a 4-finger glove. Nope. So epinephrine will bind to all 4 of these receptors. Norepinephrine will only bind to alpha 1, alpha 2, and beta 1. So epinephrine binds to all 4, but norepinephrine only binds to 3 of the 4 because this beta 2 is too small for it. Stuff like that saved my butt when I was learning pharmacology and learning how drugs or chemicals change. Because later we'll talk about this. There's something called L-DOPA, and you've already heard this. What kind of patients take L-DOPA? Parkinson's, right? So this L-DOPA is like a 7-fingered glove. And then when you cleave it, it turns into dopamine, and it's like a 6-finger glove. Whoops, I'll put that there. Or a 6-finger hand. And then when you cleave that, it turns into norepinephrine, which is like a 5-fingered hand. And when you cleave that, it turns into epinephrine, which is like 4 fingers. So they're all very similar shapes. You just pluck a little piece off of them to change them. So can epinephrine actually bind to a dopamine receptor? It can, yeah. It's small enough that it fits right into a dopamine receptor, which is interesting. Okay, so there's your pre-pharmacology overview, I guess. But for this class, you just need to remember what's on this slide. So the acetylcholine or cholinergic receptors bind to acetylcholine, and the adrenergic receptors bind to adrenalines. Noradrenaline and adrenaline. We are the only country in the world that uses the term epinephrine and norepinephrine. It's like the British system. We're the only country in the world that uses the British system. Except, well, actually the Britons don't use it. Huh?
Not using the metric system.
Like where? Oh, yeah, we're so smart that we're special.
So what do they say?
What? They say adrenaline and noradrenaline. Yeah, we say epinephrine, norepinephrine. So when you read papers that were written in Europe, they all say noradrenaline or adrenaline in it. But then you open something that was written in St. Louis, Missouri, and they refer to it as epinephrine, norepinephrine. It's funny how I do that little back country accent when I say Missouri.
They used to sell epinephrine.
EpiPens? You can
The bottles of the White Crosses.
White
Huh.
cross tops?
I don't know what that is.
That's like speed. Like
What's it called?
methane?
Like athletes?
I want to say it was epinephrine.
Like,
Huh, I've never heard of it.
It was just some sort of a,
no, like, cause like football players were using it in
Yeah.
high school.
Is it illegal?
Yeah, no,
yeah. white
It's legal,
crosses.
It was
huh?
over the counter, but then they
I think it was just
said
methane.
kids were starting to die.
cause kids were abusing it, yeah.
It's like what they put in
But you're at
Sudafed.
high school, like.
It's
you're
all
at
those
school.
abusers that ruin the fun for the rest of us. All right, how about this question? Which one is true about the autonomic nervous system? Autonomic nervous system. How about that first one? The sympathetics have a long preganglionic neuron. Where do the sympathetics go? They come out of the thoracic and lumbar region. They go right next door to the right? So paravertebral, very short preganglion. How about number two? The parasympathetics have a long postganglion neuron. So the parasympathetics have a short postganglion. Number three, the neurotransmitter released from the sympathetic preganglionic ganglionic neurons is acetylcholine. But it's sympathetic. Is that true?
Yes.
Still true. Yep. Remember, it's the preganglionic. All the preganglionics release acetylcholine. What makes it different? What makes sympathetic different? It's the postganglionic neuron releases noradrenaline. Yep. Right onto the actual organ is controlling. So number three is true. Double check number four, though. The neurotransmitter released from the parasympathetic postganglion is norepinephrine. Now, parasympathetic and adrenaline totally conflict. So it has to be number three. Whoops. Ah, crap. There we go. All right, and I kind of talked about this before. So some drugs selectively enhance or mimic autonomic responses, and they're called agonists. If they oppose it, they're called an antagonist. You learn these names in anatomy when they said if the bicep is the agonist and moves into flexion, what's the antagonist? The tricep that's trying to move it into extension. So agonists are things that act like or mimic. If you take, well, let me tell you this. Adrenaline, what do you know it does to your airways? Is it going to constrict them or open them up? For airways. Do you want, when you're running for your life, do you want them open or closed? Open. So somebody's having asthma, what do you know about their airways? It's constricting. What do you think they give them to open them back up? Which is, it mimics, guess what chemical? You're using all the fancy words. Guess what it mimics? It's a fake version of adrenaline. Yep, they just aerosolize adrenaline and they shoot it into their airway so that when it binds there, it opens it up. If somebody's having anaphylactic shock, all their blood vessels are opening. What do you know adrenaline does? Constricts, so where they stab them with? Epinephrine pen, an EpiPen, and it does what to all their blood vessels? Constricts them. Why would you want to constrict all the blood vessels all out in the periphery?
So that the blood will go back.
So that forces the blood to the internal organs and up to the head. Yep. So things that, drugs are there to mimic real things in the body. They're called agonists. If you want to try and stop something in the body, that's called antagonists. Like, have you ever heard of a naloxone clinic? Did we talk about this before? So naloxone clinics, people that are on opiates or narcotics, when they're taking an opiate, they go to a naloxone clinic, and this naloxone goes to an opiate receptor and just sticks in it. It doesn't turn it on, it just sticks there. So when they do take an opiate, can the opiate bind to this receptor now? Nope. So what would you call that naloxone? An agonist or an antagonist? An antagonist. It blocks it. So if they are on naloxone and they take an opiate, it doesn't work on them anymore. Antabuse is another one for people that are alcoholics. This antabuse is an antagonist to the little enzyme that breaks apart alcohol. So they drink alcohol and they get really sick from it because they can't process it. Okay, and then I already mentioned this, varicosities. They're basically terminals, but they're specialized terminals for the autonomic nervous system. All right, and then transitioning to muscle. So somatic nervous system is voluntary, skeletal muscle. Even breathing. Breathing is one that tricks a lot of people. Can you hold your breath? Then those muscles are voluntary. That's just the way you have to remember it. Your brain has developed so that it controls the breathing on its own in an automatic type of fashion, but since you can hold it, or because you can hold it, it's considered voluntary anyway. Okay, so somatic, you need to remember it's conscious and voluntary. The name of the neurons are called alpha motor neurons. Are they afferents or efferents? They're efferents. Motor gives it away. What are they going to do to your body? Motor. Move it, right? Like a motor moves your car. This is not the same as an alpha or beta receptor. This is called an alpha motor neuron. Usually when they write alpha, it's a little fish, like the little Jesus fish people put on the back of their cars. Bless you, by the way. Was that really a pun? Was that? Or was it just good timing? The Jesus fish, bless you. Never mind. Anyway, so thanks for the prop with the sneeze there. And then acetylcholine is the driver here. No norepinephrine, it's acetylcholine. Is this the autonomic nervous system we're talking about?
Yes. No.
Nope, this is voluntary. It's the somatic nervous system. Acetylcholine is the driver here. Acetylcholine is what makes your muscles want to contract. The receptors on your skeletal muscles are called nicotinic. So if you take acetylcholine and it causes the muscle to contract, what's nicotine going to do when it gets into your muscles? Contraction. Causes them to tense up. It'll do the same thing with blood vessels. Nicotine causes blood vessels to contract, forcing blood up into your head, doing what to your blood pressure, by the way. Raises your blood pressure. Yeah, when they discovered nicotine, it was kind of funny because we'd been smoking it for hundreds of years, but there was a farmer that was out in the field spraying crops with a pesticide. There are two creatures on the planet that are killed by nicotine, or toxic by nicotine, and they're insects and mammals, like us. So it's a toxin to us, and what do? We roll up and smoke it. What do insects do with little tiny brains? They run away from it. Think about that a little bit. But this farmer was spraying pesticides on the field, and he got really, really sick, and took him to the hospital, and he put on that hospital gown, and then he's waiting. How long do you wait for a doctor? 2-3 hours? So he's waiting for a while, and he's getting better and better, and the doctor comes in and checks him out, and he's like, you're fine. So the guy puts his clothes back on, they're heading down the road, and 15 minutes down the road, the guy starts getting nauseous, vomity, his muscles are all twitchy, he's feeling really sick again. They turn around, go back to the hospital. Changed in the robe and everything, and the doctor comes in and says, you're fine. And he does the same routine. Why did he keep getting sick when he was going home? It was on his clothes. He spilled the pesticide on his clothes, and then nicotine was actually seeping through his skin, which tells you what about nicotine? Is it water-loving or fat-loving? It's fat-loving. Yeah, anything that's fat-loving, like opiates or nicotine, you can make a patch for it that seeps right into your skin. So it kept seeping in, and we actually found that it's a toxin, even though we smoke it. Right. And then the neuromuscular junction, instead of calling it a synapse, we actually just call it the neuromuscular junction because it's the junction between a neuron and a muscle. So you have the terminal bouton. In fact, I'm just going to show you this. Here's your alpha motor neuron coming from your brain, your spinal cord going down. You have the terminal, just like we saw before at the terminal, you have vesicles. What's in the vesicle? What's the neurotransmitter? Acetylcholine. Yep, always acetylcholine. Calcium comes in, remember, just like we talked about before. Sodium moves in up here, but when you get to the terminal, calcium comes in to depolarize the terminal. Calcium comes in, helps bind this vesicle with a membrane, opens it up, dumps the acetylcholine. The acetylcholine goes across the neuromuscular junction, and then it binds to a what? Receptor. When it binds to the receptor, it opens the receptor up. What do you think is going to start moving into the cell to excite the muscle? Sodium. We're back to sodium again. So sodium's going to come flying in. As sodium's going into the cell, it's doing what to it? Depolarizing it. This is a graded potential. So if I only open up like 2 of these channels, am I likely to get an action potential? No. But if I dump enough acetylcholine in here and I open up enough of these little channels, then I hit what? Threshold. So all of these at the motor end plate, which is the postsynaptic area. So over here, the motor end plate's the receiving side. If I have enough of these ligand-gated or these neurotransmitter-gated channels opening up, sodium comes in and it depolarizes this membrane until I hit threshold. When I hit threshold, it opens these voltage-gated channels we talked about before with the little plunger in them. So now you're opening that up, and this is the whole membrane of the cell. So now that action potential shoots down the muscle cell. And that's kind of where we're transitioning into. So everything I just told you is written out for you, step by step. Action potential travels down the axon. When it gets to the end, calcium moves in, opening up those vesicles and dumping what chemical? Acetylcholine into the neuromuscular junction. The acetylcholine diffuses, binding to a receptor. The receptor's on the muscle. It opens the receptor and lets what ion go into the muscle? Sodium. What kind of potential are we looking at right now? A graded, depolarizing with a graded potential. And then when we hit what? Threshold, what kind of channels open up? More sodium channels, but what are they? Are they ligand stimulated or voltage stimulated? They're voltage. And the voltage ones, remember, have that little special plunger. So now I have an action potential that's traveling all the way along the surface of the cell. Okay, so it spreads out. And it says spreads in both directions, so it goes out this way and it goes out this way. Deeply or just mildly? You're going to see this, by the way, over and over and over again. You're going to get to the point where you're sick of seeing it. So if after you've seen it 3 times you're still confused, let me know.
I will. I'll re-listen to this.
Okay. And then that end plate potential, that graded potential, is technically called an end plate potential. So, and I explained this. The sodium channels open up at the motor end plate. They let sodium flow in, which is depolarizing it. Right? The bigger the excitatory postsynaptic potential, you've seen these initials before. Okay? The bigger that potential, the more likely you already hit action potential, and then once the action potential is turned on, it just flows all the way down this muscle cell. Just the same way that the action potential flowed down an axon in a neuron, it's going to move down a muscle cell. And in lab, you had it yesterday. What we did is we opened all those voltage-gated channels yesterday in lab. So we popped all these open by sending actual electricity through. We didn't have to release acetylcholine. We just stimulated it. And what happened to the muscle when you released? Yep, you get that twitch. You get the contraction. So the fingers were moving. And if you haven't had lab yet, we'll do it today in lab. So we just mimicked this step down here. We skipped over the neuron. We skipped over the acetylcholine. We watched some of you cry like little girls. Some of you are actually girls. So it made sense, I guess. I don't know. Is that maybe a sexist pig, I guess? Now that I said that. I'm still a little boy at heart, so I can say cry like a little girl. Part of the He-Man girl hater, woman hater club. Okay. And then the last step of this is, remember, this is a neurotransmitter, this acetylcholine, so what do you have to do to it? If you just dump it out, what's it going to keep doing? It's going to keep stimulating that muscle. So what do you have to do to acetylcholine? You're going to have to either reuptake, diffuse it out, or break it down. Remember, those are the 3 processes. And the special process that acetylcholine goes through primarily is breaking it down. You've got a little enzyme called acetylcholine ester ACE. It's an enzyme that breaks apart acetylcholine. It splits it. It's like me opening a doorway with a key, and as soon as I pull the key out, you steal the key and you break it in half. Can I reuse it? Nope. It's a one-time use. So as this acetylcholine crosses the neuromuscular junction, as it crosses here and binds, it opens the gate temporarily, and then there's an enzyme here that once it's opened the gate, it just busts the key and closes the gate again. What's kind of cool about that is after you break the key, you reuptake the pieces. And then there's equipment in here that welds the key back together so you can do what with it? Reuse it again. Yep. So you actually recycle the loose pieces back up in here. You weld them together, put them back into a vesicle, and re-release them.
So where's that acetyl?
It's the acetylcholine esterase.
Yeah, where's it come from?
It's actually bound down here on the motor end plate. So once the receptor binds here, the acetylcholine esterase will just shift it over, break it, and then feed it back up. Right. So which one of the following is true about the somatic nervous system? How about number 1? The neurotransmitter released from the alpha motor neurons, norepinephrine. Somatic is telling you it's going to be what neurotransmitter, period? Acetylcholine. Yeah, so norepinephrine was associated with the autonomic and specifically the sympathetic postganglionic fibers. So we know number 1's wrong. How about acetylcholine esterase breaks down ACH at the motor end plate? Yep, that's true. But double check number 3 just to make sure. An efflux of calcium is what stimulates ACH released from the alpha motor neurons. No. So does calcium want to go in or out of a cell? In. That would be influx. So we know number 3 is wrong. Number 1 and 3 are definitely wrong, so it had to be number 2. Okay, so that's all finished.